Hi, I'm Sam Franklin, and I'm an intuitive life coach and a marriage and family therapist. And I've been specializing in working with anger and guilt for years. I've helped many people have a better relationship with these two emotions. And these emotions are important, just like many of our other emotions. They serve a purpose and we need them, especially in our relationships because of what I call social emotions. So let's go into anger and guilt. Why do we even have these emotions in the first place? What the purpose of them is. So I'm going to ask you a question. I want you to think about this for a second. What would the world do to someone who was incapable of experiencing anger? What would happen? If there was someone who couldn't experience anger, couldn't express anger, what would the world do to that person? So think about it for a second. And I'll tell you what the most common response that I get when I ask people is it's the world would walk all over you. And that's true. If we didn't have anger, we would be taken advantage of. We would continue to be harmed, and the world would walk all over us. So that gets at the core of what anger is and why we have it and the purpose behind it. Anger is a self protective emotion, it's a signal to let us know that we have been harmed by someone. And it's also a drive emotion, meaning that it gives us the energy to take an action. And that action is to take some type of self protective action. Now, that can look like setting a boundary, asserting your needs. It's some type of, or even like physically protecting yourself if someone is coming at you. So, that self protective action can look a lot of different ways. And we want to take that action in a way that doesn't unnecessarily harm other people. So again, anger is a signal and a drive emotion, and it's also a social emotion, meaning that these are emotions that we have. Anger and guilt are emotions that we have with other people. So it could be an individual, it could be a group of people, it could be some type of institution or system, but it's relational in some way. So anger is a signal that I have been harmed, and it's a drive to get us to take a self-protective action. And think about when you experience anger. There can be a lot of energy and it's really uncomfortable. And we often feel like we need to do something with it. And if we don't, it just sits in our body and it feels really uncomfortable. And that's because that energy is there to encourage you to take that action. Sometimes we need that energy to really protect ourselves. So that's the purpose and function of anger. So let's talk about guilt. I'm going to ask you the same question with guilt. What would the world do to someone who was incapable of experiencing and expressing guilt? What do we do with people who don't have guilt signals and don't function well with guilt? I'll give you an answer that most people say. And there's a few different ones here. One is that those people would be isolated. They would be excluded. We wouldn't want to have relationships with them. Maybe they'd wind up in jail because they'd continue to harm other people. And maybe even, and this is more common probably back in the day, they might die from retaliatory violence. Basically, if we don't have guilt, we will continue to harm other people. And people don't want to be around others who continue to harm them. So guilt is the opposite side of anger, opposite side of the coin. It's also a social emotion and it's a signal and drive emotion. So it's a signal to let us know that we have harmed someone or we're about to harm someone. Sometimes that signal comes early before we even take the action, which is helpful because the drive, the action part of guilt is to get us to stop the harmful behavior, either before we do it or after we do it, that we don't continue to harm people that way. And then it's also a drive to get us to make amends and apologize. So again, guilt is a signal that I have harmed someone or I'm about to or thinking about harming someone. And it gets me to stop the harmful behavior and to make amends or apologize if I have taken that harmful action. So you can see how it's the opposite side of anger, right? Anger is I have been harmed and it gets me to protect myself, and guilt is I have done the harm and I need to apologize and make amends. So, and you can see why they are also social emotions, right? They involve other people. And where the justified part comes in of like, when do we know when these emotions are justified and what does that mean for what action we need to take? Well, it comes down to different types of harm. So when I'm talking about anger as we've been harmed and guilt as we have harmed someone else, there's four different categories that I tend to put kind of these harms or these like duties that we owe other people, to have healthy relationships and to be fair and equal in the world. One is we owe people not to harm them physically, emotionally, or materially. And when I say materially, I mean our possessions and our property. Another category is contracts, promises, and agreements. So when we make some type of promise, agreement, or we sign a contract, formally, informally, it's really our duty and our responsibility to uphold our side of that. And if we break that, we have caused harm and we would experience justified guilt. Now, if someone else has broken a agreement with us or promise or contract, then they would do the harm to us and we would experience justified anger. The third category is it's important that we're doing our fair share in terms of contributing like responsibilities and obligations. So if there's some type of activity or project or something that we're being asked to contribute, we want to make sure that we're contributing our fair share. And if we're not, then we're probably causing harm. The other part of fairness is we don't want to take more than our fair share in terms of resources. So if we're taking more than our fair share of resources, we're creating harm, and that would be justified guilt on our part. And then the fourth category is about duty to help. So this idea of there are situations where we are more obligated to help other people, and sometimes that's very clear cut. And so I'm a coach and a therapist. If I agree to work with a client, it's my job to help them. Right? I've signed that agreement, and I've agreed to play that role. So it's my job to help them. If I'm a parent, I have a job to help my child, to clothe them, to put a roof over the head, to provide them with guidance and emotional support, love. So those are clear cut. But there are times when it's not clear cut and it's gray and it's complicated. Things like friendships or other relationships and partnerships, things that might be more equal, that where there's not a power differential there. And duty help, it gets complicated because sometimes our situation changes in terms of our resources, our emotional resources, our time resources, our financial resources that we maybe would want to help someone, but we just can't for those reasons. And so then we would have less of a duty or responsibility to help people. And same thing in return. There are situations where we feel like people have an obligation to help us, but depending on their circumstance or the nature of our relationship, they might not owe us as much of help as we think. And we want to tend to have reciprocal relationships. Power differential that, relationships are different. So like parent-child, therapist-client, doctor-patient. There are certain power dynamics where that's not a reciprocal relationship and it's not meant to be. But other things like friendships, romantic partnerships, maybe even co-workers, if someone's not their boss, those hopefully are roughly reciprocal. We don't want to keep score or anything, and so if they're reciprocal, then we want to make sure that we're giving as much as we're taking in those relationships. So that's what it comes down to. So again, those four categories of harm or determining when anger and guilt is justified. One is, so let's go through it with anger. If I'm trying to figure out if my anger is justified, if someone has harmed me, I want to ask myself, has someone hurt me physically, emotionally, or materially? Has someone broken some type of contract, promise, or agreement? Has someone not done their fair share? Has someone taken more than their fair share of resources? And then has someone not helped me where I feel like they were obligated and it was appropriate for them to help me? Now let's do the flip side for guilt. How do I determine if guilt's justified? I want to ask those same questions, but from the other perspective. Did I hurt someone physically, emotionally, or materially? Did I break some type of contract, promise, or agreement? Did I not contribute my fair share in terms of responsibility and obligations? Did I take more than my fair share in terms of resources? And then did I not help in a situation where I was obligated and it was probably appropriate for me to help out? Again, some of these things can be more complicated, but those are the four different categories when we're talking about justified anger and guilt. Again, all emotions are valid, and we can experience anger when none of those things happened. And so we would take very different actions if that was the case. So let's go back to what action we would take with these emotions. Like, what do we do with them? So when we have justified anger, when someone has harmed us, we want to take that self-protective action. That's a boundary action. That's a self-assertive action. When our guilt is justified, we want to make some type of amends, stop the harmful behavior, make an apology. So that covers the basics of anger and guilt. And I hope that helps you break things down, a little bit more understandable concepts to feel like you can really implement these concepts in your day-to-day life, where these emotions don't feel confusing and you don't understand what they mean and you're not sure what to do with them. I hope this gives you more of a roadmap to managing these emotions and helping you understand them and validate them for yourself. So even if someone doesn't feel like you should be angry, maybe it's possible that you do have justified anger. Validate that for yourself. Give yourself permission to be angry. And guilt, oftentimes people put guilt on us. They guilt trip us. And there's a lot of times that we don't need to feel guilt. So validate yourself in that too. When someone puts guilt on you and you don't need to feel guilty, or maybe you put guilt on yourself and there's no justified guilt, then it's about letting it go, reminding yourself that you did no harm and it's time to let it go. So pay attention to your anger and guilt patterns and how they show up, and walk through these different steps and asking yourself if you've harmed someone or if someone's harmed you, and then validate yourself. And if you get confused, check in with people who are safe in your life to get some feedback on, is this anger justified? Do I need to feel guilty? And this is the action that I wanted to take or I'm thinking about taking. Is that appropriate? Or what do you think? What would you do? And that can really help us until we develop more self-trust. We get a lot of social learning around these two emotions. Anger is inconvenient for other people because it often means they're not going to get what they want. Guilt is convenient for other people because it usually gets them what they want. And so we tend to be socialized and trained to experience guilt even when we don't need to, and to block our anger and to invalidate our own anger even when it's justified. So pay attention to your own social training, and that can happen with family, that can happen with society. Different identities really play a role in that. Race, gender, people get different messages around anger and guilt. So pay attention to the messages that you've received about these emotions and think about how that has influenced your relationship with these emotions, and then what you want to, and then how you tend to experience them and what you do with them. So hopefully this stuff is more clarifying. And remember to have compassion with yourself. We're all doing the best that we can. And hopefully now more of an information and understanding, you can take that and start to work to have better relationship with anger and guilt, and then therefore also with other people. If you'd like to know more about these emotions or would like to go deeper in your own personal work, feel free to reach out with me. In my intuitive life coaching business, I work on helping people with these emotions feel more empowered, work on setting boundaries, relationships, communication, and just being able to have better relationships with their emotions in general. So if you're interested, feel free to reach out to me. And I hope this was helpful.